My parents clapped so loudly their hands got red, bending over the theater seats to tell everyone close, "That's our son, our only successful child." I sat 2 rows behind them in the darkness, drowned by the thunderous clapping of 300 people as my younger brother smiled on stage in his graduation robe. For years I had been the family invisible girl, the disappointment who didn't fit into their high society expectations. My mother didn't even look back at me when she muttered to a stranger that I was a lost cause. But suddenly the dean came up to the microphone, raised his hand to silence the throng and stopped the entire ceremony. There was complete silence in the room. When the dean looked directly at the back row and called out my name, my parents completely froze. "Follow my narrative till the finish, and remark the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Nora Bennett, and I am 34 years old. My existence has been shaped by who I am not, rather than who I am for as long as I can remember. I'm not the brilliant prodigy. I am not the family's pride. For my parents, Richard and Eleanor, I had always been nothing more than a ghost occupying their opulent home, an invisible girl whose sole function was to stay out of the way of their golden kid. That title belonged exclusively to my younger brother, Julian. From the time Julian was born, the world swirled around him. If he drew a stick figure, my mother framed it as a masterpiece. If he failed an exam, my father blamed the school system. He was spoiled, complimented, and shielded from all the little repercussions of his own behavior. While my quiet hard work was viewed as an anticipated baseline, absolutely unworthy of mention, I spent my whole 20s sacrificing my own comfort, quietly working long hours to keep our family afloat throughout a tremendous financial crisis they brought upon themselves. Yet, they conveniently removed my sacrifices from their mind. Now, it was the morning of Julian's graduation from an exceedingly prominent university. Pressed clothes, pricey perfume, and my parents' nervous, fluttering enthusiasm created a tumultuous tempest in the house. As I stood in the hallway holding a large manila folder tightly against my chest, watching them fuss over Julian's graduation gown, I knew today would be the ultimate test of my endurance. When we arrived to the grand university auditorium, the sheer enormity of the event made my chest clench. The enormous auditorium was filled with a deafening roar of conversation as hundreds of proud families filled the room with their passion. However, as soon as we stepped inside the door, my father gave my brother his ticket and led my mother to the front. Without a single backward glance, they took their primo, reserved seats right near the stage. I was left standing in the hallway until an usher led me to the very back where I was completely engulfed by the higher tiers' shadows. I sat by myself and leaned forward, trying to see my parents through the throng. That was when I overheard a pair of sharply dressed women seated just a row ahead of me speaking with my mother, who had turned around to meet them. Oh yes, Julian is our total world. Over the dull clamor of the throng, I could plainly hear my mother's voice. When one of the women kindly inquired about her other child, my mother sighed dramatically, a voice dripping with fake disappointment. "Nora, I'm afraid she's just a lost cause. A tremendous financial drain who never quite found her footing." Her words hit me like a physical blow, utterly erasing the reality of the last decade. They had entirely forgotten that when my father's business nearly failed, it was my hidden, arduous job that paid off their debts. As the light started to go down, I tightened my grip on my folder and swallowed the harsh taste of their betrayal. The great commencement ceremony eventually began, and the mood in the massive auditorium went electrifying. One by one, names were called, and students walked across the stage to get their diplomas. I peered from the shadows of the back row, my heart thumping against my ribs as the line of graduates went forward. Then the loudspeakers reverberated with the announcer's voice. "Whitaker, Julian Richard." Instantly, my father stepped up from his front row seat, fully ignoring decorum. "That's our son, our only successful child," he yelled loudly, as he raised his arms in the air and turned to address the 300-person gathering. My mother applauded fiercely beside him, her face gleaming with total devotion. The entire audience exploded into warm ovation for Julian, who stood confidently on the platform, a smug sneer growing over his face as he absorbed in our parents' utter love. The deep embarrassment blazing in my chest overshadowed the pain of his conceit from where I sat. To my parents, my entire life had been reduced to an embarrassing footnote, absolutely unworthy of being acknowledged in public. While I sat alone in the dark, Julian offered the audience a theatrical wave, flawlessly portraying the role of the family savior. But I repositioned the heavy folder in my lap as he got ready to leave the stage. Finally, the agonizing demonstration of their partiality was over, and the moment I had been silently getting ready for was about to start. Julian was about to leave the stage with his diploma when the dean abruptly interrupted the routine by approaching the central microphone. The 300 persons in the auditorium experienced a sudden inquisitive silence that replaced the courteous whispers of the crowd. My parents were just about to sit back down, their faces still flushed with the joy of Julian's moment, when the dean raised his hand to urge total stillness. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we move to the concluding words of today's commencement," the dean began, his voice booming clearly through the professional sound system, "the university would want to offer a unique acknowledgement. This afternoon, we are recognizing an amazing individual whose enormous generosity and quiet dedication made our entire graduating class's new sophisticated research facility wing possible." My mother grimaced, saying something to my father as they looked about, utterly unconscious of what was happening. With theatrical accuracy, the dean opened a clean, sealed envelope and read the name of the university's top donor. Without this person's amazing vision and strong financial backing, many of the initiatives our graduates benefited from simply would not exist today. The tension in the room peaked, hanging heavy in the still air. The dean adjusted his spectacles, glanced directly past the front rows, and focused his sights onto the upper tier. "Please join me in expressing our heartfelt gratitude to our principal donor, who sought no acknowledgement until today, Nora Bennett." The camera perspective focuses on Richard and Eleanor, as their triumphant smiles suddenly turn to masks of complete fear and uncertainty. The dean paused, letting the weight of my name linger in the total hush of the auditorium. Slowly he looked up and invited me to stand, so the entire crowd could acknowledge my extraordinary effort. Calmly I emerged from the back row's shadows and stepped into the light, smoothing down my blazer. In an instant, 300 people spun around in their chairs to look at me, their eyes wide with wonder, and then they let out a huge round of thundering applause. The courteous clap was entirely overshadowed by the thunderous applause. Julian had just gotten it. My parents stared back at me, their bodies going utterly rigid as they froze. My mother's mouth fell open in a wordless gasp, while my father's face drained of all color, his hands held mid-air as if immobilized by the shock. Julian stood fully forgotten on the stage, his cocky sneer completely erased, replaced by an expression of pure embarrassment. For 22 years they had looked down on me, entirely clueless to my genuine worth. But now, in front of everyone they wanted to impress, the tables had turned, and they were absolutely powerless to stop it. The truth was, I wasn't the struggling failure my parents badly wanted to believe I was. I had discreetly created a very successful IT consulting business from the bottom up over the past 10 years, while they paid me no attention at all. In order to safeguard my assets from my parasite family, who continuously depleted resources to support Julian's extravagant, careless lifestyle, I purposefully kept my wealth completely hidden from them. Julian clearly didn't acquire his degree on academic merit. My parents had no idea that their golden baby had nearly been ejected for unpaid fees months before, and it was my anonymous trust that quietly stepped in to finance his full remaining tuition. Not only that, but the exact deed to the luxurious mansion my parents currently lived, and belonging to me acquired out from under their increasing debts after their final, unacknowledged financial crisis. The dean continued speaking, adjusting his microphone as he enthusiastically applauded my great humility. He stressed to the surprised audience that I had asked absolutely no public recognition or special advantages for my support, fully intending to keep entirely silent until the university's board decided to surprise me with this public honor. Under the lights of the auditorium, I felt the oppressive weight of 10 years of secret fall away as I stood erect today. In front of 300 witnesses, my parents' carefully constructed illusion of who in our family is actually successful had just been completely destroyed, and there was no turning back. The instant the commencement ceremony concluded, Richard and Eleanor hastily raced toward me through the dispersing crowd, their faces twisted into desperate, artificial smiles of faux devotion. Julian followed them, appearing completely diminutive and discouraged. "Nora, sweetheart, we always knew you were capable of greatness," my mother said, reaching out to hug me. I quietly stepped back, refusing her touch, and pulled the thick manila folder from under my arm. I silently handed them certified legal summons, demanding the immediate full reimbursement of Julian's undisclosed school debts and the unpaid rent on the opulent home they had been living in. Julian gasped when he realized that the sister he had spent his entire childhood making fun of would determine his entire future, status, and way of life. My parents were finally forced to face the hard reality of their own financial collapse and Julian's lack of real-world skills. Leaving them flabbergasted in the midst of the crowded foyer, I turned around and walked out of the building permanently, eager to live my life fully on my own terms. If you were in my position, how would you respond? Have you ever had a family member take credit for your silence or treat you like a disappointment? Tell me the city you're watching from in the comment section below. Meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will undoubtedly surprise you. I appreciate you viewing until